Marcus Hale had never been the kind of man who ran toward anything. For most of his 41 years, he had moved through life at a careful, measured pace. The kind of man who double-checked deadlines, read instruction manuals cover to cover, and never made a decision without sleeping on it twice. He was a high school biology teacher in Dayton, Ohio, with calloused hands from grading papers and a lower back that ached every single morning when he climbed out of bed. He was not an athlete. He was not a hero. He was just a father, and most days he wasn't even sure he was doing that right. His daughter Lily was 9 years old when the doctors confirmed what Marcus and his wife, Sarah, had been quietly fearing for 2 years. Retinitis pigmentosa, a progressive condition that had already stolen the edges of Lily's vision and would, over the next several years, pull a slow curtain across everything she could see. The ophthalmologist used words like manageable and adaptive strategies, but Marcus had sat in that sterile office and felt the floor shift beneath him like something fundamental in the universe had been rearranged. Sarah had left when Lily was 6, not because of the diagnosis, which came later, but because their marriage had been unraveling long before any of that. She lived in Portland now, called every Sunday, sent birthday cards that arrived exactly on time. She was not a villain in this story. She was just someone who had built a different life, and Marcus had spent 3 years trying not to be bitter about it. So it was just the two of them, Marcus and Lily, in a house on Fernwood Drive with a golden retriever named Biscuit in a kitchen that always smelled faintly of the burnt toast. Marcus made every single morning without fail. Lily called him the worst cook in Ohio, and he called her my harshest critic, and they had built something small and sturdy and theirs out of the wreckage of what their family was supposed to be. Lily was 13 when she told him about the marathon. It was a Tuesday in October, one of those sharp-aired evenings where the leaves had turned fully, and the sky went dark before dinner. She was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, her face close to the page, her thick-framed glasses perched at the end of her nose. Marcus was attempting to not burn spaghetti when she said it, casual as a weather report. "Dad, I want to run a marathon." He turned around with the wooden spoon still in his hand. A marathon. 26.2 miles, she said, not looking up from her notebook. "There's one in Columbus every April, the Scioto Valley Marathon. I already looked it up." Marcus set the spoon down on the counter. He thought about his daughter's deteriorating vision, about the fact that she could no longer see the whiteboard, clearly from the second row, about the way she navigated crowded hallways, at school with one hand trailing the wall. He thought about 26 miles of pavement and thousands of runners and water, stations and hills. "Lily."
"I know what you're going to say."
"What am I going to say?" She finally looked up at him, and there was something in her eyes, not defiance exactly, but something closer to certainty. The quiet kind that doesn't need anyone else's permission. "You're going to say it's complicated. You're going to say we should think about it. You're going to say maybe next year." He opened his mouth, closed it again. "Dad!" Her voice dropped half a register. "The doctors say my central vision might start going in 2 or 3 years. Maybe sooner." She paused. "I want to run a marathon while I can still see the finish line." Marcus Hale, who double-checked everything and never made a decision without sleeping on it twice, stood in his kitchen with burnt spaghetti water boiling over onto the stove and said, "Okay." Lily blinked. "Okay? We'll figure it out." He turned back to the stove, turned the burner down and said, without turning around, "We'll train together. Both of us." There was a long silence behind him, and then he heard it, the small, compressed sound of his daughter trying not to cry and deciding not to. "You've never run a mile in your life," she said. "I know. You get winded carrying groceries up the stairs." "Lily, I'm just saying." "I know what you're saying." He turned around and looked at her directly. "We start Monday." They started Monday. Marcus downloaded 3 different training apps, read 2 books about marathon preparation, and bought them both proper running shoes at a specialty store where a 20-year-old with a gait analysis machine told him his left ankle pronated. He bought moisture wicking, socks and a foam roller and a heart rate monitor and a reflective vest for the early morning runs. And he researched guides for visually impaired runners until 2 in the morning, sitting at the kitchen table with Biscuit's head in his lap. The first morning they ran together, they made it 6 blocks before Marcus had to stop and put his hands on his knees and breathe like a man who had just been pulled from water. Lily stood beside him and said nothing, just put her hand on his back and waited. "I'm fine," he gasped. "I know," she said. They walked the rest of the way home. The second morning they made it 8 blocks. The third 10. Marcus's calves screamed at him every night, and his knees sent formal complaints every morning. And he developed a blister on his right heel that Lily bandaged for him, with the focused precision of a field medic. While telling him he was being dramatic about a bubble of skin, he started setting his alarm for 5:15. He started going to bed by 9:30. He stopped drinking the beer he used to have on Friday evenings and started drinking the protein shakes that tasted like chocolate cardboard that Lily had selected from a YouTube video about marathon nutrition. By December, they were running 2 miles together without stopping. By January 4, Marcus lost 11 pounds. His lower back stopped aching in the mornings. He started recognizing other runners in the neighborhood. A nod, a small wave, the silent acknowledgement of people who had chosen the cold and the dark over the warm bed. What surprised him most was Lily. He had assumed she would be limited. He had prepared himself privately for the reality that her vision would make this harder, that they would have to modify their goals, that the marathon might become a 10K or a half, some smaller, safer version of her dream. What he had not expected was that Lily would be fast. Not fast in a teenage girl way. Not fast in a compensating for disability way. Genuinely, structurally fast. Her stride was longer than her frame suggested. Her breathing was steady and rhythmic where Marcus's was still ragged at any pace above a jog. She seemed to find something in running that she'd been missing everywhere else, a place where her other senses sharpened and carried her, where the sound of her footsteps on pavement and the feeling of the road through her shoes told her everything she needed to know. They had worked out a system. Marcus ran on her left side, close enough that the back of his hand occasionally brushed hers. When a curb was coming, he said curb. When there was uneven pavement, he said rough patch. When they needed to cross a street, he said clear or hold. They had practiced it so many times it became a kind of language, a private code spoken at a half jog between 2 people who understood each other's breathing patterns better than most people, understood each other's words. February brought ice and they ran through it. March brought rain and they ran through that too. Marcus in a raincoat that Lily said made him look like a crossing guard in a midlife crisis, and Lily in a blue jacket that caught the puddle-reflected streetlights like something luminous. April arrived the way Ohio Aprils do, cold in the morning and confused by afternoon. Race day was the 22nd. The night before, Marcus made his traditional burnt toast, and Lily made the pasta with olive oil and salt that they had eaten the night before every long run. For the past 4 months, they sat across from each other at the kitchen table and didn't talk about the race. They talked about Lily's biology project, about a book she was reading, about whether Biscuit seemed to be sleeping more than usual and whether they should mention it to the vet. They were very careful, both of them, not to say the things they were actually thinking. At the door, before they went to bed, Lily turned to him. "Dad." "Yeah." She seemed to be working something out. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you already did it." He looked at her. "Did what?" "The whole year." She gestured vaguely at the house, at the road outside, at the accumulated months. "All of it. You did it. That's the thing I want you to remember. Whatever happens at the race." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Get some sleep." "I mean it." "I know you do. Get some sleep." She went upstairs. He stood at the window for a long time, looking at Fernwood Drive in the dark, the streetlights making pale circles on the wet road, and thought about what it meant to run toward something. For the first time in your life, race morning was cold and clear, and loud in the way that only race mornings are. Thousands of people and their nervous energy compressed into a few city blocks. A kind of electricity in the air that Marcus felt even through his jacket. Lily stood beside him at the starting corral, her bib number pinned slightly, crooked on her shirt the way it always ended up no matter how carefully they attached it. Her guide tether, a soft loop of elastic cord connecting her wrist to Marcus's, sat between them like a held hand. They had agreed on a pace, conservative for the first half, steady through the hills at mile 15 and 16, whatever they had left for the final 6. Marcus had a plan written on a small card in his jacket pocket. He had prepared for this the way he prepared for everything. Completely, carefully, with the obsessive thoroughness of a man who was deeply afraid of letting someone down. The gun sounded. 26,000 people began to move. For the first 13 miles, it was everything they had practiced. Their system worked the way it always worked. The curb calls, the rough patches, the steady drum of their matching footfalls on the Columbus streets. Lily ran with her chin slightly up and her face turned a few degrees toward the sound of Marcus's breathing. Around mile 7, she said, "You're good," without looking at him, and he said, "You too." And that was the whole conversation. At the halfway mark, Marcus felt the first flutter of something wrong. He ignored it. At mile 16, as they climbed the long, shallow hill they had researched and prepared for, the flutter became a pressure, a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with exertion. That sat differently than the burn in his legs or the dull ache in his left knee. He slowed almost imperceptibly. Lily slowed with him because they were connected, because after a year of running, together she could feel a change in his pace. Through the elastic tether, the way a sailor feels a shift in the wind. "Dad, I'm okay." Your breathing changed. "Hills," he said. "Just the hill." They crested the hill. The tightness remained. Miles 17, 18, 19. Marcus ran through it. He ran through it the way he had run through January ice and February cold, and every morning his body had told him to go back to bed. He focused on the sound of their footsteps. He focused on Lily's shoulder 3 inches to his right. He focused on the card in his pocket and the plan they had made and the finish line that was 7 miles away, then 6, then 5. Mile 24. Later he would not remember falling. He would remember the sky tilting. He would remember the tether going taut and Lily's voice saying his name, not Dad, but Marcus, the way people use a name when they need it to mean something. And then the pavement coming up to meet him with a solidity that was almost gentle. And then a blankness that was not quite unconsciousness but was close to it. A gray softness at the edges of everything. He heard Lily before he saw anything. Her voice, clear and controlled in a way that made his chest ache when he thought about it later, calling out to the runners around them. He's down, he needs help. Someone call medical. Not panicking, directing. Her hand on his chest, her fingers pressing against his neck the way they had both learned in the first aid course they'd taken together in February because Marcus had insisted on it, measuring his pulse with the focused calm of someone who had been preparing for hard things her entire life. The medical team reached them in 4 minutes. He was conscious when they loaded him onto the stretcher. Lily was holding his hand. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't," she said. "Lily, don't apologize to me." Her voice was even, but her jaw was tight. "Just breathe." The diagnosis, delivered in a Columbus hospital room 3 hours later, was a cardiac arrhythmia, an irregular heartbeat that had likely been undetected for years, aggravated by sustained exertion. Not a heart attack, not as catastrophic as the worst of the scenarios Marcus had constructed in the gray softness at mile 24, serious, treatable. The cardiologist said the word fortunate twice, and Marcus noticed both times. He was kept overnight for observation. Lily sat in the chair beside his bed and did not leave. Someone had brought her a hospital blanket that she wore around her, shoulders like a cape, and Marcus thought, not for the first time, that his daughter was the most self-possessed person he had ever known. Around midnight, she said, "I want to finish it." He looked at her. "The race is over. There's another one." She was looking at the window, at the Columbus night. "In Chicago, September, the Chicago Marathon." She paused. "I looked it up on my phone while you were sleeping." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Lily." His voice came out rougher than he expected. "I need you to know something." She turned to look at him. "This year," he stopped. "Started again. Everything we did this year. It was the best thing I've ever done. Not because of the race, because of the mornings, because of the Tuesday, runs in the rain, and the Saturday, long runs when we didn't talk for 6 miles. And you started making the burnt toast because you said mine was always worse." Shook his head. "You said whatever happens at the race, I already did it." "You were right. I want you to know I know that." Lily was very still. "But," she said quietly. "But," he exhaled, "I have to get cleared by a cardiologist, and I have to do whatever they tell me. And if they say I can run Chicago, we run Chicago. And if they say I can't run the full distance, we figure out something else. We don't decide tonight. She nodded. The blanket slipped from one shoulder. However we do it, he said, we do it together. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Biscuit was at home with a neighbor. The hospital machines made their small measured sounds. Outside, Columbus was finishing its Saturday night, completely unaware of the two people in room 412, who had run 24 miles together and were already, quietly thinking about the next 26. Lily reached out and took his hand. She didn't say anything. She just held it the way she had held it on the road at mile 24, with the steadiness of someone who had decided a long time ago that she was not going to let the hard things break her. Marcus looked at his daughter, at the girl who had asked him to run when he had never run, who had trained beside him through a year of cold mornings and aching knees, who had called out clearly to strangers, on a race course without letting her voice shake, and felt something settle in him. Not the resolution of a thing, but the understanding of it. The finish line had never really been in Columbus. It was here. It had always been here, in the elastic tether between them, in the private language of curbs and rough patches and clear, in the burnt toast and the Thursday runs. In the morning she had bandaged his heel and told him he was being dramatic. In every mile they had run together toward something neither of them could have named when they started, something that turned out to be much larger and much more durable than a race. In September they went to Chicago. Marcus had been cleared, monitored, medicated, given a list of protocols and warning signs, and a cardiologist who made him promise to run with a heart rate monitor and a phone. They stood at the starting line on a cool October morning, and Lily pinned her bib on crooked, the way it always ended up. And Marcus straightened it, and she let him, just this once. The gun sounded. They ran. At mile 24, Marcus's legs were burning and his heart rate monitor beeped twice, and he checked the number, and it was fine. It was within range. It was just a body doing what bodies do when you ask them to carry you 24 miles. Lily was breathing steadily beside him, her chin up, her stride long and fluid, beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they have been built carefully over a long time. Curb, he said. I see it, she said. They crossed it together. At mile 26, with 2/10 of a mile left, Lily said, Dad? Yeah, I can see the finish line. His throat closed. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. They ran through it side by side, the elastic tether slack between them, the crowd noise rising around them like water, and Marcus Hale, a man who had never run a mile in his life 14 months ago, a man who got winded carrying groceries, a man who had prepared for this with the obsessive care of someone terrified of failing. The only person who had never once doubted him crossed the finish line of the Chicago Marathon with his daughter's hand in his. Lily was crying. She hadn't cried at mile 24 in Columbus when he was on the pavement. She hadn't cried in the hospital room. She was crying now, standing in the finisher's chute with a foil blanket around her shoulders and a medal around her neck. And Marcus thought it was probably the most honest thing he had ever seen. He put his arm around her and pulled her in, and she let him, the way she had let him straighten her bib. Just this once, just for this, and they stood there in the middle of everything, in the noise and the cold and the other finishers streaming around them, and Marcus thought about all the things a person runs toward when they finally decide to start running. He thought about how the finish line was never really the point. The running was the point. The running and who you did it with, and what you learned about yourself in the dark. Miles before the sun came up and no one was watching, and the only thing keeping you going was the sound of your daughter's steady breath beside you, telling you without words that she believed you could do this, that she had always believed you could do this, that some people know you better than you know yourself, and if you are very lucky, one of them calls you Dad.
I hope this story made you cry. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needed it most now. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe for this type of more stories and like this video for my motivation, and leave a good comment in my comment section. Thank you.